Here on behalf of the group that has filed a suit with the Federal Highway Department for the cameras, Brad Evans, EVANS. This is never an easy alternative. This isn't our preferred alternative to work against this project, but this is a boondoggle, as has been reported over and over again. We're after justice, we're after transparency, we're after accounting on this project. This is a $2 billion project that's likely to cost much, much more. We've sought transparency through this project with both CDOT, the City of Denver, and the Federal Highway Department to try to come up with the transparency in what this project would really cost. There's more than just a financial cost. There's a social cost. There is a environmental cost to building a 2-mile long, $2 billion 40-foot trench through the middle of our city. That's a big health impact to all of us, not just as residents and citizens of the City of Denver, but this is going to affect everyone in the state. Part of the funding for this mechanism is the State Enterprise Fund, Bridge Enterprise Fund, thank you, which is everybody's paying for it across the state, and it's all being spent in Denver for 35 years, 50% of that money. I would like to recognize a few of our electeds that are here today. We've got Councilman Paul Cashman, Joe Salazar, who's a fighter for all of us. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. I'd like to thank our attorney, Melissa Haley, who's works with Keating, Wagner, Polidori, and Free. She has worked endless hours on this. Aaron Goldhammer, thank you for your participation in this. We're not laying down on this. We're going to fight this in every possible way we can. This is just one way we're going to do it. Today we're going to introduce Kyle Zeppelin, who's also helping with this project. So, Kyle, are you ready?
Ready. So I'm Kyle Zeppelin, K-Y-L-E-Z-E-P-P-E-L-I-N. I'm an attorney. I'm an attorney, developer, and 10-year resident of the Globeville neighborhood where I work and live with my wife and 2 young daughters, 9 and 4. They were born and raised at Taxi, which is located on the north side of the river in Globeville, in an area that has been deemed River North or Rhino. As a developer, along with my dad, I've been widely credited with putting Rhino on the map with multiple catalytic projects, Taxi, The Source, and now Zeppelin Station at the new commuter rail stop in Rhino. Our focus in business and personally over the past few decades has been to invest for the long term and also stay engaged in the community process and elevate the city around us. Today I ask you, citizens of Colorado, to look at the proposed I-70 expansion critically, to be informed and engaged in our local community where we can make the biggest difference. I, along with our business, oppose I-70 expansion because of the egregious social, economic, and environmental toll that it will take on everything around it. We refuse to play the patronage game as other business leaders have done and offer our silence for a terrible project that will burden the city and state for decades. A 22-lane highway through a small section of Denver that will further displace and negatively impact already overburdened populations before it bottlenecks down to 4 lanes at I-25. After years of construction mayhem, it won't even work for cars and is a disaster for people and devalues the city along the way. Cities around the country have figured out that 1960s-era urban highways through minority neighborhoods are some of the worst planning practices for the last century. And now, with a booming economy, it's time to invest in people and the future with transit, green infrastructure, and affordable housing. As groups are having to do in so many other instances, we are excited to be able to go forward before an independent judiciary to be able to review the facts for what they are. There are 2 primary arguments. I'm just more of a recovering attorney, but I can tell you there are 2 primary arguments, lines of legal argument as it relates to NEPA in this case. First, CDOT and Denver decided to skip the environmental review process and plow forward with the massive drainage project, Platte to Park Hill, that is required to support a below-grade highway through an underground river, which includes multiple Superfund sites along the way in what has been considered the most polluted zip code in the country, 80216. CDOT and Denver now claim that the project was unrelated to the highway, but it is nowhere in their most recent master plan for drainage in 2014 that prioritized other projects around the city. The intervening cause is that Denver and CDOT signed an intergovernmental agreement to have Denver provide the highway drainage. The result is one of the biggest fee increases in the history of the city, which is another area where all citizens in Denver are being seriously impacted by highway drainage that is now taking up 2/3 of the total fee increase. The park, City Park Golf Course, which is on the Federal Registry of Historic Places, is a particular third rail for Fed funding, and assuming the ditch ever goes forward, it will have to avoid the park, account for the river and people in its path, and generally look much different. The second issue that CDOT continues to mislead the public about, which Brad mentioned, is the cost of the ditch, in hopes of getting in the door with what is already the most expensive road construction project in the history of the state. Below-grade highways through cities have a terrible history of multi-billion-dollar boondoggles, including the Big Dig. If the costs to date are any indication, this one will likely be a budget monster, with drainage costs that have already ballooned 6x from 50 mil to what is now over 300 million. At a base cost of $2 billion that will likely exceed $4 billion, the ditch will create a massive drain for virtually every other area of the state budget, including the big line items, transportation, health, and education as likely targets based on other boondoggles. Along with attorneys Melissa Haley and Aaron Goldhammer, co-plaintiffs and supporters, we are standing up to CDOT. We are saying, no way are you going to jam this through the process, dig up City Park, create pollution impacts on people and kids and elderly during the 5 years of construction hell that they aren't talking about, and understate the true cost and not have to study or answer for the normal process. Thank you very much.
All right, our mic, you got to get close to it. Are there any questions? Would anybody else like to speak on behalf of this? Anybody? I mean, we're in this. We're going all the way with this. We hope to find a way to make our city amazing with transportation solutions that are for the 21st century, not for 1960. We've got people that you can ask questions after this.
So what are you
yes, sir.
Court relief? What are you asking them to do? Delay this project indefinitely?
With our suit, it's to re-review the NEPA requirements, so it would combine both the Platte to Park Hill and the I-71. They'll have to start over with their EIS, as I understand it. Other questions?
You indicated that the two were linked and you had a super secret document that we were going to get the
I have a super, yes, and I gave you the link, so anybody will pass that out. It's the Montclair Basin Expansion Project. Is that what's the, actually, I don't remember the actual words. Montclair Basin Evaluation. It's an internal city document. It clearly connects CDOT and the city, and it came out in the IGA pretty much from that, talking about how connected they are. And so that's a requirement that if a project is connected, they have to study it together. And
I'm sorry, can you explain to us what the connection is in this document? What is it that this document does? That we didn't already know.
That you didn't already know? Well, it talks about, so, you know, the city and the state has said that they're separate, that the drainage and the highway weren't together. This Montclair document talks about how it is together, so the drainage is required for the highway.
It also speaks to how the NEPA process.
Come on up. That's Aaron Goldhammer here.
It also.
Sure. Our mics all got moved away from you guys.
That mic is really
Slippery.
Yeah. This mic really doesn't help us. It's these mics that we're getting all of our audio. Thank you.
the document that's being. I'm Aaron Goldhammer, and it's a pleasure to be one of the attorneys on the case, along with Melissa Haley as well as Jay Touchton. The 2014 Montclair drainage feasibility evaluation explicitly refers to how this two-basin drainage project, as it was initially known, later known as Platte to Park Hill, was really being pursued in a way that helped the Colorado Department of Transportation avoid its NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act, obligations. So there's pretty specific references to the NEPA timeline and how they would have to start everything over again if they included the drainage in their study, and that was not comporting with what they wanted the schedule to be. So it went to the city to do it. So that's part of what that document lays out.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, let's get a ditch to ditch too for the cameras. Right?
All right, what else you got? Anything else? I'm touching your mics.
What's the other step legally?
What's the other step legally for this, or?
You filed a suit this morning. What happens now?
So it gets heard. Can you give me a hand with that, Melissa? Obviously, I'm not an attorney, so here is the attorney. The mic.
I'm Melissa Haley, H-A-I-L-E-Y.
Hold it. Yeah, we're working on it. These are all dangly. Ah!
That's not better.
All right, there you go.
That's fine. Can you hear me? Okay, my name's Melissa Haley, H-A-I-L-E-Y. The suit was filed last night in U.S. District Court in the District of Colorado, where we're standing. The next step in the case really will be for us to move for a preliminary injunction. We're going to ask the court to stay the construction of both the Central 70 project and Platte to Park Hill while it considers the merits of the case. We could do it pretty much any time. I think we'll probably wait approximately 30 days just to get our ducks in a row. As you can imagine, it's a lot of work, and we do want to give the Justice Department an opportunity to enter an appearance. So when we file our motion, there'll be someone ready to respond on the other side.
Is any work going on right now that you're concerned about that you can stop right now?
There is, and that's why it's so important that we link these two projects together. There's construction right now going on at Globeville Landing Park. That's construction for the Globeville Landing outfall, which is basically the final conduit for where all the stormwater is going to be deposited into the South Platte River. That construction is ongoing. I believe it started in December of 2016 was at least the date in the contracts. The exact date of construction when it started, I don't know. But it is going on right now, and why that's concerning is that construction is through what's called Operable Unit 2 of this Superfund site, the Vasquez Boulevard I-70 Superfund site. There's known contaminants in the ground. We know they're being spread by construction, and we just simply want transparency so we understand how do these contaminants potentially hurt people, and what can we do? What can we do about it?
You want to stop that temporarily or permanently, or just stop it where it is?
The idea behind the case is to get a permanent injunction. We wouldn't be able to get that kind of relief, though, until the court had had the opportunity to fully review the merits of the case. In this courthouse, that would typically take about a year, start to finish. So the purpose of the preliminary injunction is to preserve the status quo while we go through the legal process, and then if we are successful, we would then ask for a permanent injunction. What would happen then is the government would be required to go back to the drawing board with the NEPA process. As Brad was saying, what we're asking them to do is collectively consider the Platte to Park Hill project in the umbrella of the Central 70 NEPA process, and that's what we'd like them to do on a remand.
How many years did you say the process might take?
Typically in court, it's about 1 year. Any other questions about the case?
Socioeconomic demographics of the area.
That is a better question for Kyle. Oh, Candy, I didn't realize you were here. Please.
Yes. It's because I got my sunglasses on. My name's Candy Sedebaca. I am a resident of Swansea, one of the most impacted neighborhoods on this project. And the demographics of our neighborhood were an 84%. Can you hear? It's like dying.
Thing's working great. It's gonna start over. Try it again.
Spell your name. The one on the right is the short one.
All right, try.
Candy, can you hear me? No. As long as you guys can hear me. Candy.
You got nothing.
Nothing, yeah. Candy Sedebaca, last name C-D-E-B-A-C-A. Our neighborhood is 84% Latino and one of the highest concentrations of poverty in the city of Denver. Also some of the largest households in the city of Denver, but also a historically immigrant community. We know that over 80% of the neighborhood cannot afford 80% AMI. And that's the closest I can get to the average income, but we know that means that 80% of the households don't make over $50,000. Our lawsuits are spread out, and so I am a plaintiff on the other lawsuit, the EPA challenge, and as a registered neighborhood organization, I'm connected to that one. And so there are a lot of impacted people, and I think that the lawsuits should reflect that. And this is a lawsuit that reflects another group of people who are affected. And so the broader impact that we can show, the better. We know currently, as I-70 stands, we have 70% higher rates of asthma, cardiovascular death, cardiovascular disease, and cancer because of the highway. And we know that 80216, where they're digging, is the most contaminated zip code in the entire country. We also know that the mitigation, there's a mitigation responsibility in the ROD, but there's no specifics on how the Superfund site will be mitigated, because they're waiting to decide on the contractor, and the contractor will then decide how they mitigate. So that's highly problematic considering the circumstances and how contaminated the site is.
Do you believe that if they redid the NEPA process with these other factors in account that it wouldn't pass muster? Do you think we're going to ultimately get to a different outcome?
Absolutely. I think the purpose of this case is to show that if the projects are combined, if they were combined as they originally should have been and studied together, that this would have been found to be a solution they didn't want to pursue. We know in the ROD right now that the option they chose is the most harmful, will have the most impact on the communities it's happening in. And it's kind of a mystery to us how, even with the data that they are including in the ROD, this was the option that was chosen. So to bring them together would only show even further harm to these communities.
Do any of the plaintiffs have an alternative path solution for I-70? If you don't like this, what is it that you do like?
So, thanks for asking that question. On this suit, probably. Sure. Yeah, the underlying highways just fundamentally don't work very well in cities. That's why major cities all over the country, all over the world, aren't pursuing them. The street grid works really well for cars. It works really well for people, and we feel like that's where the focus should be. There's a lot of capacity in the street grid to serve local traffic. Long haul traffic, which is a very small percentage of the total counts, is better served going around the city and not competing with local traffic. So there's a variety of alternatives that have been proven out. The highest and best use for the city is people, and really that should be the focus, particularly for mega projects such as this one. Another point, just to backtrack, is that if they have to go back through the process, the light gets shined on it, the true cost gets exposed, and that impacts the political process. If it's clear that this is a $4 billion project instead of one that's being represented as $1.2 billion, but we know is $2 billion, that looks a lot different to have to answer for that to a statewide audience. The other part of that is City Park Golf Course is on the federal list as Federal Historic Registry. There isn't an ability to build there. The stormwater project looks a lot different without that. The Platte River is federally designated as a contaminated waterway for multiple contaminants, and there isn't an ability to dump further pollution in the Platte River, assuming they go back through the process, have the light shined on that. And the construction process, which is kicking up pollution, impacting populations, looks a lot different if they have to go back through the process. And the engagement with people and the neighborhoods, City Park wasn't notified that they were impacted by the highway. If, assuming they have to go back through the process to answer for it, people are given adequate notice. They have the opportunity to participate in the public process. So the final form of this project looks a lot different if CDOT and Denver and the feds are having to answer for the legal process.
Speak to 76 and 270 here.
So the primary alternative is I-76, 270. It's an existing interstate highway. CDOT and DRCOG have already contemplated expanding that. It requires improvements regardless. We're not talking about an 18-lane highway. We're talking about 15% of the total traffic counts. That needs to be improved regardless. To serve interstate long-haul traffic, local traffic, people going from Stapleton to downtown will make use of the street grid, which requires some significant improvements. The exorbitant cost of this project creates a lot of opportunities if it's redeployed to invest in the community in positive ways, in affordable housing, in green infrastructure, in transit to really transform the way that North Denver works.
So I have a question real quick about the lawsuit itself. We've already identified that this is primarily a community of color, primarily lower income families, next to a Superfund site, and with some major health issues going on in the community. Is that part of the lawsuit? And if so, how has the federal government or CDOT responded to that, if they have at all?
So, just to respond to that, you're saying has the process taken into account the impacts on minority populations, more vulnerable, already overburdened populations? And the answer is the stormwater project that is massive. It's the biggest stormwater project in the history of the city, has not accounted for those impacts. It hasn't gone through the federal process. There's no way of knowing what's included. They haven't had to answer for the environmental laws in that case, and that's a large part of what this lawsuit is seeking to do, to go back through the process, to have to answer for those impacts. And the assumption, the likely result is the project looks a lot different if it has to be implemented in a responsible way.
Can I jump in real quick on that?
Joe, I appreciate the question. You may be aware that there was a separate civil rights complaint filed that more directly addressed these disparate impact issues on communities of color. That was rejected by the Department of Transportation. Unfortunately, the state of the law is that it's very hard to turn that rejection into private action. And so I think we do need some better laws surrounding transportation decisions and impacts on communities of color and civil rights generally. But so that's not necessarily the main focus of this suit. However, that was pursued in a very thorough complaint filed by Earth Justice that was nevertheless rejected. And that unfortunately kind of stops that general avenue of attack.
Just one more to your question, because I want to make sure we give a complete answer. That's absolutely correct, and we don't have an environmental justice component in this suit because that's already been decided by the rejection of the civil rights complaint. But we do have a claim in our suit that there was a failure to adequately analyze the public health impacts from the hazardous materials that are going to be dug up through the excavation, particularly in the 40-foot trench that's going to be dug. The documents, the NEPA documents, the FEIS and the ROD, in our opinion, superficially deal with this contamination problem. While they say that soils and hazardous materials are going to be disturbed and spread and they will cause public health impacts, it does nothing to talk about what those contaminants are and the way in which they pose a problem for area residents. The FEIS and ROD don't talk about what the reach of that contamination might be, and they don't take any step to talk about how people who may be impacted can do things to protect themselves from that harm. So that is one portion of our case.
While you're there, can you speak to how your legal efforts being?
How our
I imagine this is going to be an expensive legal fight. It's not a wealthy neighborhood. How is this? Sure.
So we are, the Zeppelin family is a significant part of funding this effort. We're in a unique position to be able to do that and provide that. Certainly maybe have a catchy name, but we're only one of the litigants, the plaintiffs here, and we have had a significant role. Ditch the Ditch is an organization that we're a part of supporting. They've raised over $50,000 to date for both the legal effort and political effort to be able to influence the outcome here.
Councilman Espinosa, would you like to come up? We have Councilman Rafael Espinosa here. Debbie Ortega, Councilwoman Debbie Ortega too, thank you for being here.
And I'd also like to acknowledge Councilman Paul Cashman as well. So thank you for attending. All I wanted to do was thank the Zeppelin family, all of the plaintiffs who are supporting what has been going on. I mean, this community in a very protracted struggle to have these matters addressed. And I just want everyone to sort of know and be assured that that the National Western Center, the city of Denver, and the state of Colorado, and particularly these neighborhoods of Globeville, Elyria, and Swansea, would all be better served if these suits are won by the community and not by the state or the federal government. And so I just want to thank you all for being here and your persistence, your doggedness, and your volunteer contributions. They're many. They're vast, and this whole community will be better served if you are successful. And so I just want to wish you luck from my position as a representative of District 1, Northwest Denver. Thank you.